swell. I found myself in the middle of winter in France, snow very high, total war everywhere. They had headlights, big lamps that lit up the night sky so that you could see everything all night long when it was dark. But they had this artificial moonlight so that the Germans would have a harder time slipping up on you. And they were very skillful. The first town that I came to, that I was assigned to as an infantryman, was a little town called Herlesheim, which would be in the very rich polder land of eastern France. They had grapes there and cattle and other things. But there was one thing that had happened just before we came. The Americans had come into Herlesheim. They hadn't seen any Germans. They thought they were safe. They made a big mistake. The whole division that occupied Herlesheim ran amok trying to find blankets to get warm with, instead of thinking, maybe the Germans are closer than you think. As a matter of fact, that turned out. I was in the town and I saw there was dead Americans everywhere. There was heaps of them. There was windrows of them. There was nothing but dead soldiers with their white bed sheets on. And the Germans had attacked at 2 o'clock in the morning with tanks. Infantry cannot stand tanks. So the whole of the division simply went amok, trying to escape. And the Germans were ready for them. They killed and killed and killed. It was such a terrible shock to me to see all the dead Americans there. And they were hanging in fences, they were on top of roofs, they were trying to run across the fields. I had one little friend from Mexico. He had been shot, and I said, "Where?" And he said, "Right here. You see this?" He had a German bullet right through his ear, right up against his head. And he said, that's how close it was. He said, but they didn't know what to do. They just went amok. They were green troops. And so I was witness to that. But gradually things settled down. We went to patrolling, which we had to do. We had to patrol and find out where the Germans were so that we could point that out to them, so the artillery could find them, that the infantry could find them, that patrols had to constantly search for. And this was how I spent my combat months in France, going out every night to try to find the Germans before they found us, and trying to destroy them with artillery, with our own artillery, with our own fighter pilots that dove in and cut them to pieces. It was a very terrible, gruesome time in my life. But in time, we could see that the Germans were losing the war. And finally, the stalemate ended in the war, in the winter war, and it got warmer, and we could stand it. But we toughened up plenty. After that is a matter of searching out the Germans every way we could and capturing them. If they didn't surrender, of course, they took the consequences. But that's what I remember. Finally, the whole of the German army I saw fall to pieces, and they threw their guns away. They 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 set fire to their tanks and set fire to their trucks and surrendered just the way they were. And we were told to be very careful because the Germans had a history of being able to fight when they pretended to be friendly. That wasn't true at all. The Germans were so tired of war, they were just absolutely wanted to surrender. They didn't want any more war. And so the whole country was overrun with German soldiers of every kind, and every one of them just simply wanted to get away and go back to the life they led earlier, before the war. And that was the beautiful part of my occupancy there in France. To see the country go back to peace again, see everybody pretending to be friends at least with one another, and they were very happy to surrender to us because the Russians were not so easy on the Germans as we were. We hadn't been hardened like they were. So, yes, they didn't want to surrender to the Russians. They knew that the Russians had suffered terribly. They lost millions. We know that now. In even the last days of the war, they just. Carl, is there any questions you would like to ask me about anything particular, or?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Quick thing. So during your off time when you weren't fighting, I know that there were many celebrities that came and entertained the troop. Did you see any?
You mean the officers of the German army?
No, like
or
entertainers.
Oh.
Yeah.
You mean American entertainers?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I sat about as close to Marlene Dietrich as you and I are here. Marlene Dietrich was a German who fled from Germany, and in her day she was a great movie star, a great entertainer, a good singer. You probably don't know the name of Marlene Dietrich, but she was one who followed Bob Hope and Bing Crosby and all those celebrities all over Europe, and we were sitting in the rain in foxholes in the mud of the farmland in the middle of winter. But she had a beautiful dress on, and she just looked gorgeous. But she was the life she led to. I always remember her above anybody. There was others, but I remember mostly because the Germans hated her forever, because she turned and helped entertain the American soldiery in Europe, and never asked for anything except just to be appreciated. So we saw lots of other entertainers that went over there, but I do remember her expressly, because she was such a talented, such a beautiful lady, such a marvelous person, and we could hear the shells, we could hear the artillery going off while she was there in the rain singing to us, which was as close as you could get to coming to war, just to just to um, just to come to see us. Um, 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 Go ahead.
Okay. So what did you do during your off time or free time?
Well, most of the time we just tried to survive. This was when the war was still on. We would never see a hot soup or anything like that because it was simply too dangerous to send out kitchens, you know. So we just ate cold food, chocolate bars, uh, very poor diet, very bad diet. But that's the way it was. They couldn't travel with a kitchen. They would be ambushed. There was hot war going on everywhere. We would also go out and stand guard uh, in different places as directed. If they tell you to go, you went, and you'd be the ears and the eyes of of everybody, because we were right there on the ground with the Germans, and when they showed up, we let everybody know where they were, and we fought. And I had many close calls, but nothing lethal. Um, I I remember very expressly that one of the last weeks of the war, there was a big field of armaments in France that faced right up against the German border. It was built before the war, and it had great concrete turrets with massive artillery sticking out of it that could shoot for 30 miles. The Germans had a railroad they could shoot for 45 miles, and we also found it and enjoyed ourselves climbing over this railroad with the biggest guns they could. They in the war against Germany, the French were subjected to railroad artillery that could easily shoot 45 miles, and I found myself going through the Maginot Line. It was almost 30 miles long, and nothing but guns facing different directions. And they hoped to keep the Germans out of France when France got into the World War II. They didn't succeed. They were overrun by Germans who came in and disarmed France. Opposite the Maginot Line, which was the French line, was what they called the Siegfried Line. The Siegfried Line was just the same thing, another 25 or 30 miles, and it looked like tank stoppers and things like that to keep the tanks that might attack Germany. That was their line. And I remember the night that we were in the Siegfried Line, and we were pinned down by guns all around us. And we found that the Germans were shooting at us about 5 miles away. So at 3,300 feet per second, you had just a few seconds, you'd see the bullets coming at you, and then you'd better duck down. And then right after that, the bullet would go right over you. And so and they had a muzzle velocity of about 3,300 feet per second. So we had a great time that night dodging those bullets because they couldn't go below the ground, and we were in foxholes. And then they started shelling us, and I was so close. One shell went off while I was digging, and when I looked toward where the shell was, the smoke was coming out of the ground right beside me. So that shell hit so close to me that I still wonder how I escaped it. But I did escape it, and I wasn't hurt, although I was knocked completely out for quite a while. So, but the next day we were in Germany, and the war, which ran on for a while. This was close to Bavaria, which would be south, and toward Switzerland, you know. That was the country I was in. I was in the 7th Army. There was the 5th and 7th and the 3rd. And then on the other side of the world, there was other armies for the Japanese, you know. But I was in the 7th, and then there was the 5th. That was in Italy, I believe, and the 3rd, which was General Patton's army. General Patton was killed, you know, after the war. He was out hunting, going out hunting, and he had ordered a limousine. They had limousines then for the generals, and he wanted to go out hunting. Well, when he went out in his limousine, a 6x6, which is a big truck, ran into his limousine and hurt him. Then he was taken to a hospital. And the funny part was that I had the same thing happen to me. I was in a Jeep with 2 other men, and this Jeep was hit by a truck with an American driver, and it set the Jeep afire, and they pulled us out. But I spent the next year recuperating from this. Wow. Even when the war was done, it was right after the war. But Patton lived only 10 days, and I was there at the place where he was, and he died.
That was probably a good break time there. 20.